He thought it would be just another talk show, but when Will Smith attempted to humiliate Keanu Reeves on live television, the world watched in disbelief. What started as a joke transformed into a moment so raw that it exposed one man and silenced millions. Then, Keanu posed a question that no one anticipated. Before we delve into this remarkable story, let us know where you're tuning in from. If you enjoy narratives like this, subscribe to the channel, as tomorrow we have another inspiring tale you won't want to miss. Backstage in a narrow green room illuminated by a single overhead bulb, Keanu Reeves sat quietly, his elbows resting on his knees, hands folded, eyes cast down to the floor. Around him, the chaos of production buzzed. Assistants rushing, stagehands shouting last-minute cues, wardrobe staff checking lists, and makeup artists starting from one guest to the next. Yet, in his corner there was stillness. Keanu didn't ask for anything. No water, no script, no preparation. He simply waited. The walls vibrated faintly as the theme music for Face to Face played through the studio speakers. It was a nationally televised late-night event, with millions expected to tune in live. Tonight's episode was a special edition, something rare even in the glitzy world of lights and lenses. Two of the biggest names in entertainment, Will Smith and Keanu Reeves, face to face. No rehearsals, no pre-approved questions. Just an open conversation. Across the studio, Helena Cortez stood in front of a makeup mirror, adjusting her earpiece. The legendary host, with decades of journalism experience, was accustomed to tension. She had interviewed world leaders, survivors, and whistleblowers, but tonight felt different. Her fingers trembled slightly as she clicked the mic into place on her blazer. 30 seconds, a floor manager called out. Helena didn't need reminding. She glanced at the cards in her hand, blank. She had chosen not to use a script for this show. Not tonight, not with these two men. In the main stage area, the set glowed with violet and indigo lights shimmering against smooth backlit panels, casting a cathedral-like glow across the room. The audience was already seated, a sea of anticipation murmuring with excitement. Twin cream-colored armchairs faced each other at center stage, a small glass table between them, intimate, designed for tension. The countdown echoed through the studio. 5, 4, 3, 2 lights snapped on, cameras rolled. Helena stepped into the glow as if she belonged there, her voice rising above the music, smooth and strong. Good evening, everyone. Tonight's Face to Face is unlike anything we've done before. The crowd erupted into applause. She continued without flinching. We're joined by two men who've changed the way the world sees film. But more than actors, they are symbols of transformation, fame, struggle, silence, and truth. She paused just long enough to build anticipation. Please welcome Will Smith. The lights brightened, and the unmistakable beat of Will's signature song played as he walked onto the stage, arms open wide. He danced for a moment, flashed his million-dollar grin, slapped hands with an audience member in the front row, and gave Helena a warm hug. He smiled but didn't linger. Her eyes were already moving to the curtain. And now, a man who rarely speaks unless it matters, who doesn't chase the spotlight yet never leaves it. Please welcome Keanu Reeves. The music changed to a slower, calmer tune, a gentle piano chord rolling through the room. Keanu stepped onto the stage, dressed in black jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a weather jacket, a small silver crucifix hanging around his neck. He walked slowly, no theatrics, just presence. He nodded politely to Helena, shook Will's hand with quiet firmness, and sat down in the chair across from him. The applause softened but didn't stop. It changed tone, a reverence entering the room. Something significant was about to happen, though they didn't yet know what. Helena sat down between them, just a few inches back from their line of sight, her hands resting on her lap. The lights dimmed slightly, leaving a soft glow that made the edges of the stage feel both intimate and cinematic. The audience, previously buzzing with excitement, settled into a hush that felt almost sacred. "This is not a performance," Helena said, her voice measured and calm. "This is a conversation. There are no cue cards, no edits, and no pre-approved questions tonight. It's just you, your truths, and each other. The tension in the room shifted. Not heavier, just more real. Will leaned back in his chair, legs crossed, arms relaxed. His smile still lingering, but his eyes darted to Keanu with subtle alertness. There was a trace of something else there, a quiet edge beneath the charm. Competition, perhaps, or curiosity. Keanu, by contrast, remained still, his hands resting loosely in his lap. He didn't look away from Will, but he didn't stare either. His presence filled the space, not with force but with attention. Will chuckled first, breaking the silence. "I gotta say, man, this is surreal," he said. "I've always wanted to share a stage with you." Keanu gave a small nod. "You've got this whole Hollywood monk with a shotgun vibe," Will added. "Nobody knows if you're going to quote Nietzsche or start a gunfight in slow motion." Laughter rippled through the audience. Keanu offered the faintest smile. "We all break something," he said softly, "even when all we're trying to do is listen." The room paused. The joke had landed, but so did the follow-up. There was weight in those words, and Will felt it. Helena leaned forward slightly, watching both men closely. Her instincts told her to let it unfold naturally. Will sat up a little straighter, brushing invisible lint off his slacks. "Can I be real?" he asked. Keanu didn't hesitate. He nodded once. Will leaned in. "You ever think your career could have been way bigger if you weren't so damn slow?" Gasps, small and scattered, broke from the audience. Helena blinked. That wasn't in any outline. Even Will seemed to recognize the shift. His smile tightened, as if trying to control the impact of his words after they had already left his mouth. But Keanu didn't blink. He tilted his head slightly. Not confused, not insulted, more like curious. Then came the answer. "What you call slow," Keanu said, "I call present." The silence was immediate. Not uncomfortable, not dramatic, just real. It landed with more force than any argument. Will sat back. Helena didn't speak. Even the studio crew behind the cameras seemed to stop moving. Keanu sat there unchanged, but something had changed in the room, in the air, in Will, and it had only just begun. Will shifted slightly in his seat. The confident posture remained, but something in his jaw had tightened. He glanced toward the audience, perhaps expecting laughter, maybe even backup, but there was none. Only a quiet, alert stillness. Every face was watching, every breath held. Keanu hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't defended himself. He had simply answered. Helena sensed the weight of it, but still didn't interject. She knew better. Some moments don't need steering. Will broke the silence first, trying to reassert rhythm. "Okay," he said with a chuckle that didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's deep, bro, but Hollywood doesn't pay for presence. It pays for performance. You stop moving, you disappear." Keanu didn't blink. What happens when you disappear from yourself? There was no irony in the way he asked it, no sting. Just a question, one that didn't aim to wound but to open. Will hesitated. That wasn't the kind of banter he was used to. Not on TV, not when the spotlight was this bright, not when the audience expected clever jabs and cool charisma. But Keanu wasn't playing that game. He wasn't there to impress. He was there to show up. Helena finally leaned in slightly, her voice slow and composed. "Keanu, you seem comfortable with discomfort. Has that always been the case?" "No," Keanu answered. "I learned it. I lost a lot. My sister, river, time, joy. I disappeared from everything before I learned how to stay." The studio was silent again. Will looked over at him, something flickering behind his eyes. Something quieter than jealousy. Deeper than rivalry. Recognition, or the start of it. "You disappeared," he asked. Keanu nodded. "Not because I couldn't face the world, but because I needed to hear something quieter than it." Will sat back, digesting it. Helena watched both of them now. The table between them might as well have been a mirror. Two men, two different paths, both carrying stories the audience had never truly heard. Keanu folded his hands again. His voice almost a whisper. "The world moves fast," he said, But grief doesn't care about pace, it waits. Will didn't speak. Helena didn't speak. No one in the room moved because something had entered the space between those armchairs. Something fragile, electric, and real. And no one knew yet where it would lead. But they knew this much. This wasn't just going to be an interview. It was going to be a reckoning. Will Smith adjusted in his seat, tapping the edge of his shoe against the floor. The tension from Keanu's last words still lingered, but Will wasn't ready to sit in silence. He was too used to movement, to rhythm, to the applause that followed every punchline. Silence was unpredictable. He cracked his knuckles softly and then leaned forward, flashing his trademark grin. "You know, man, you've got this whole Hollywood monk thing going," he said. "Like if John Wick ever gave up revenge for a meditation retreat in the Alps." Laughter rippled through the studio, some of it nervous, some of it genuine. "You're like the monk with a shotgun," Will continued. "Nobody knows whether you're about to quote the Dalai Lama or empty a clip in slow motion." Helena chuckled faintly. The line was good. It worked for the crowd. Keanu, however, didn't smile. Instead, he tilted his head slightly and spoke without rush. "We all break something," he said. "Even when all we're trying to do is listen." The room quieted again. It wasn't the kind of reply that fed a laugh track. It wasn't meant to be. It hung in the air with a strange kind of gravity, like a sentence still unfolding. Will nodded slowly, but the pause that followed felt heavier than he expected. His shoulders stiffened just slightly. His smile lingered, but his eyes had already narrowed. He wasn't quite sure what Keanu meant, and that unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Helena leaned back, sensing the change. The energy in the studio was shifting again. Subtly but undeniably, Will tried to keep the tone light. Okay, he said, lifting his hands. "But let's be real, Keanu. You ever think your career could have been way bigger if you weren't so damn slow?" Keanu didn't react. Not with a laugh, not with surprise. He just sat still, his hands loosely folded in his lap. His eyes focused on Will like he was trying to understand what had really been asked. Will shifted again, this time more obviously. Then Keanu replied, "What you call slow, I call present." The words landed without noise, but the silence that followed was deafening. Even the camera operators behind their lenses seemed to stop moving. No one in the audience looked away. Will blinked once, thrown off by the stillness, but Keanu didn't move. He didn't need to, because whatever battle Will had tried to start wasn't going to be fought on his terms. Will leaned back slightly, his fingers tapping against his thigh. For a man so often in command of the room, the silence unsettled him more than any insult might have. He was used to applause. He was used to reactions. But this quiet acknowledgement of something deeper left him exposed in a way he hadn't anticipated. Helena's eyes remained steady on both of them. She had moderated political debates, brokered tense exchanges between world leaders, but nothing felt quite like this. Not because it was hostile, but because it wasn't. It was still too still. Will finally broke the pause. "I mean, come on," he said, laughing again, though the sound was slightly forced now. "You're telling me you've never thought about just speeding things up, taking every offer, signing the big franchise deal back to back?" Keanu answered without flinching. "Speed isn't clarity," he said. "Noise doesn't mean truth." A few heads turned in the audience, eyes locking on one another in unspoken recognition. These weren't quips, they were invitations. Will sat forward, elbows on knees. "Yeah, but if you're too slow, you miss things. You fall behind. The world doesn't wait for anyone." Keanu's voice remained calm. "Maybe the world doesn't wait because it's scared to stop." Will blinked. "Scared to be quiet, to feel, to be alone," Keanu said. "It keeps moving so it doesn't have to look in the mirror." Helena felt her breath catch in her throat. The words were too sharp, too clean, too honest to be scripted. They came from somewhere real. Will's posture changed. He didn't lean back this time. He didn't smile. He looked at Keanu, searching for something in his face, as though the calm was a mask he could peel off if he stared long enough. "You're really not playing, are you?" Will asked. "No," Keanu said. "I'm here." Simple. But the simplicity only made it heavier. Will shook his head, a dry chuckle leaving his lips. "Man, you've got people out here treating you like some kind of guru just because you don't say much." Keanu nodded. "Sometimes saying less lets others hear more." Will raised his hands in surrender. "You're like a walking fortune cookie, bro." This time the audience laughed, but it wasn't mockery. It was tension released. But the tension hadn't gone anywhere. It had just stepped back into the shadows for a moment. Helena stepped in gently. "Will, what's behind that question you asked earlier?" Will hesitated, then smiled slower this time. "I guess I've always wondered," he said, "if being present like that really works or if it's just an excuse to disappear." Keanu looked at him without judgment. And again he didn't answer right away because sometimes presence speaks loudest when it waits. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice low but clear. "Disappearing isn't the same as running," he said. "Sometimes it's the only way to remember what you even sound like beneath the noise." Will held his gaze for a long second. The usual sparkle behind his eyes had dimmed just slightly, as if something under the surface had begun to stir. Something he hadn't planned to face tonight, not here, not in front of millions. The audience remained quiet, leaning in. The buzz of a talk show had vanished. This was something else now, something unfiltered. Helena let the silence stretch, letting it speak as loudly as the dialogue. Then she turned slightly to Keanu. "When did you learn that?" she asked. "The value of stillness." Keanu didn't blink. "After my sister got sick and when River died. There's a moment grief gives you. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It just clears the room." Will's mouth tightened. He looked down for the first time. "That wasn't acting, that wasn't a script," Helena asked. "You didn't want to stay in the spotlight." Keanu shook his head. "I didn't want to perform in a world that took them from it." The air thickened again. Will looked back up, his voice dropping, stripped of humor. "I get that," he said, "but I couldn't disappear. I had to keep showing up, keep moving, because if I stopped..." He trailed off. Keanu nodded. "Then maybe we were doing the same thing. You ran forward, I ran inward." Will studied him for a long moment. "You think one's better than the other." "No," Keanu replied. "I think one is louder." The words landed quietly, but their impact was anything but. Will looked out over the audience. He didn't smile, he didn't speak, he just breathed. And for the first time that night, he looked like a man who didn't need to win the room. Helena finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think the world is ready to hear silence, Keanu?" "I don't know," he said, "but I think it's tired of noise." The audience didn't clap. They couldn't. Not yet, because something vulnerable had cracked open. Will looked at Keanu again, less like a rival and more like a man trying to understand something he had never let himself feel. He leaned back quietly. The war for attention had ended, and a different kind of conversation had just begun. Will straightened in his seat, flashing another smile as if trying to pull the conversation back into more comfortable territory. The cameras were still rolling, and part of him instinctively reached for control through charm, through rhythm, through the practiced cadence of a man who'd spent a lifetime winning over rooms. "Look, I hear you," he said, waving a hand casually. "But let's not forget Hollywood doesn't pay for presence, it pays for performance. You don't keep moving, you don't stay relevant." There was again the smoothness, the logic, the survival instinct. But this time it felt like armor, and Keanu saw it. He didn't challenge the statement. He didn't smirk. He just asked calmly, "What happens when you disappear from yourself?" The question landed differently. Not as a clapback, not as a defense, but as a mirror. One that didn't accuse but revealed. Will's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Enough for anyone watching closely to see something flicker beneath it. Helena's hands tightened around the armrest. She knew this wasn't banter anymore. This wasn't ratings-driven sparring. This was something else, something that could only happen when the mask slipped. Will recovered quickly. "Man, you really are committed to this monk energy," he said with a laugh. Like who talks like that in real life? What happens when you disappear from yourself? Come on, you sound like a journal entry. A few people in the audience chuckled, but not many. The energy had changed too much. The room was no longer on Will's rhythm. Keanu didn't laugh. He didn't push back either. He waited for Will to finish, then he spoke again, his voice soft.